Welcome to the Whole Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you become a fat burner, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey everybody, it's Debbie Potts, and I'm the host of the Whole Athlete Podcast, and I'm here today with a new guest. His name is Garret Rock, Dr. Rock from Athlete Blood Test. Hey Garret.
Hello.
You're over in Denver, or where are you?
In Denver on a sunny day today.
Ah, good. So I'm in Seattle, so thanks for rearranging, trying to make our times work. I know, busy appointments, and I just got back from my fun job that I have as personal training clients most of the day, and nutritional therapy and coaching some clients, and just got home from my day, and I get to talk to you about athlete blood work, because I'm always talking to clients that they need to get blood work done, and the stuff that we get at our doctor's office is not the same. And you guys created this company. We'll talk about kind of the background of it, but kind of designed for athletes to get lab work. So talk a little bit about what you do and how athlete blood work came about. Sure.
So I serve as the director of sports science for Athlete Blood Test. We are a subsidiary of what's called Fuel Sports Science. Mm-hmm. And Fuel is really a research and development entity. But Athlete Blood Test is the culmination of we're going on 10 years of research and working exclusively with professional and elite athletes. It started out as a research experiment where we were just testing Ironman athletes and determining if they are at particular risk for simple conditions like anemia, and it has since progressed significantly predictive testing.
From doing the lab testing you've been doing, we're doing on endurance athletes primarily.
Yeah. We started out with, like I said, the research experiment. The initial research experiment started out with Ironman athletes, and now our research has expanded to really athletes of all sports, and we've determined ideal ranges of particular biomarkers for optimizing performance based on age, gender, training volume, and intensity.
And you are a doctor yourself. What's your background?
Yeah, so sports nutrition, chiropractor is my primary degree, in exercise physiology.
Mm-hmm. So you are you an athlete yourself that you got passionate about this area, or is it because you live in Colorado with a bunch of amazing athletes?
A little bit of both. I've played the Ironman game a couple times and done quite a few half Ironman, I think 7, a lot of ultra endurance mountain bike races, marathons, trail running. So yeah, I'm actively engaged, or was until a child came along. She's resulted in a few DNSs on my record, but and being in Colorado exposed me to more athletes and more endurance athletes, and so the interest really initially came from a local coach, and I was working a lot with the athletes clinically. And we decided to run a little experiment, and that was in 2008, early 2008, and from there it's taken off. And as we see now, it's not only us. There are other significant players on the market. We actually just came to market this year, 2017.
That's great. That's a lot of work to get up to that point. So the mission of Athlete Blood Test is what? What's your goal and vision and mission for the company?
The underlying mission is to give every athlete their best experience in sport. Those of us who are lucky enough to be able to participate in sports, especially long distance endurance sports, triathlon, running, cycling, etc. It's if you're not feeling well in your training and your racing, then you're not likely to stick with it. And it's only a healthy habit if you're going to stick with it. And this is such a critical component to essentially creating lifelong athletes, because we have a high incidence of problems that can make it as an athlete. If you're training over 8 hours a week, you have a high incidence of problems that'll make your experience less than fun, I guess. So, so our underlying mission is just to give everybody that we can the best experience in sport.
And that's, I mean, I think we as athletes ourselves, and we're in the business of trying to help repair and rebuild athletes, that we see this common theme that, you know, if you're not taking care of what I call the whole self with the holistic method, from transforming kind of from the inside out, it's really hard to be the best athlete and perform your best in life and sports, as we say on the podcast. And I think getting blood work is really important part of that holistic athlete, that you're working on not just your training routine, but your recovery. Are you eating the right foods? Are you moving right? Are you doing mobility exercise? There's so much more to it than just do your swim, bike, run, or whatever sport you're doing and then sleep. And there's nutrition. It's not about having chocolate milk afterwards and having that, meal within 30 minutes. There's so much more to it, and it's so individualized. And that's why I always ask my athletes to get lab work done. And I don't work on a lot of triathletes anymore, because I'm kind of not doing as much Ironmans myself, but working on people nutritionally side of it and working on what is the root cause, what is going on. And we need to do some different tests, and that includes lab testing, figure out, okay, what is going on inside of you. And so your lab work, kind of talk about the different tests that you guys put together, and then let's dive into the periodization of it, that it's not, year round, you don't need the same test. So to kind of talk about that side of it.
Sure. So it's a bit of an emerging science. We've been around close to a decade now. We feel really good about our science, and we've created 4 test panels. And these test panels are based on basically what we found to be the most important. So in turning this into a business, you have to look at cost versus benefit. And there are tests out there, test panels, where you can test everything under the sun and glean a lot of information that cannot be acted on. And then there's our panels, or that's the way we see it. And they're as efficient as can be, yet don't bypass the important biomarkers to athletes. So we've created the platinum panel, the gold panel, the silver, and the bronze. The platinum is our genetic test offering. So we test 12 genetic biomarkers. I believe it's 12. And then we run blood tests as comparison, because genetic alone only tells you tendencies, or what we're likely to see, whereas blood actually shows you. And they usually match pretty well, but it's usually going to be like an absorption issue or some sort of intake issue. The gold panel is by far most common, or most popular. It's really assessing nutritional needs, both dietary, supplemental needs, training tolerance, and recovery, which are kind of the 3 pillars of what blood biomarkers are going to tell an athlete. The silver panel is more of a symptomatic panel. If an athlete is struggling with recovery and very specific to recovery, then we take away some of the extras on the gold panel, and reduce the cost, and we just address that issue with recovery. And the bronze panel, we see it more as the pre-race panel. something to do about 5-6 weeks before your race, and just fine tune micronutrients and help determine what your taper likely needs to look like.
So you get the lab work. You guys help people on the website, athlete blood test, which one to take. And then I paid for my gold kit that I've just ordered. And then I went to LabCorp, which I've done before. I've gotten lots of lab work over the last 5 years. So I'm used to going in to LabCorp, one of those places, and getting the blood work they'll have on file that here's what I need to get done once you process it. And then you get your blood taken out. Luckily, most athletes, we have good veins. So you sit there and they like the veins usually on my arm if they're not dehydrated. And then you get, a bunch of vials taken out. And then the test results, I did mine last Thursday and I got the results back yesterday, which is Tuesday. So technology-wise, it's pretty fast compared to even 5 years ago when I started getting all this detailed lab work done outside of a doctor's office. So the turnover is pretty fast. So LabCorp gives you the results back and then you interpret them yourself and send a report to the client.
Correct. So the reason it took us so long to come to market, despite being one of the older players as far as research and maybe the oldest of those delivering this product, at least specific to the athletes that we deal with, is because we really felt that it was important to deliver a clinical model, have hands and eyes on every test. And the reason we came to that conclusion is we tried doing more of an algorithm type intervention. So, your results might show that you're low in a particular micronutrient, and the system just automatically spits out a recommendation or a generic recommendation. What we found in our research was that we had almost a 30% intervention failure rate.
Wow.
So the
recommendations, the standard recommendations,
failed 30%. Yeah. And that wasn't good enough for us. And so we felt that it was really important to identify when a person is more likely to need, I'll use iron as an example, an iron carbonyl versus a ferrous sulfate. For example, people with gastrointestinal disorders or highly acidic gastric tracts, they are very likely to break down ferrous sulfate rapidly, and so very little of it will become bioavailable. And so in those people, you want to give them a form that's going to be broken down by the acid and made bioavailable by the acid and sit in the colon a little bit longer in the intestines and get absorbed. So by turning this into a clinical model and having somebody put their eyes on every test, which in most cases right now is me, our intervention failure rate is down around 5%. So we are able to help nearly every.
Well, that's what I find why we need to do.
Scenario.
Sorry, just lost you. But the lab tests that we would go do. Hold on, internet connection stable. So I have to edit this part. There. Okay. All right. So the lab tests that we get, just a regular doctor. People go in doctor for everything. Drives me nuts. But the lab tests, if you went to your doctor, what are they going to get? They do usually just an iron. They do your thyroid, but they don't do the breakdown. What do you ever look at what a regular doctor does compared to your profiles?
Yeah, we get a lot of requests to read tests that were performed by just primary care doctors, and testing an athlete is a real specialty. The tests that we run aren't standard, or some of them are standard, some of them are not. But what I'll use iron as another example while we're on it. What most athletes are going to get from their primary care doctor is just ferritin. And for an athlete, you must test both ferritin and serum iron.
Yeah.
It's really critical to determining the best approach for that athlete, because you need to see if the body's pushing iron to storage or if it's keeping it all bioavailable, that matters in your assessment of the athlete. If they're keeping it bioavailable and you have high serum levels but low storage levels, then it means that there's a high turnover, and that will create your recommendations. Or sometimes you see really low, same scenario, if you see really low ferritin and you're not testing iron, that may lead to an inappropriate action, like an iron IV. You could create a situation of iron load or iron overload, which might be detrimental to an athlete too. Mm-hmm. So it's a much different interpretation. There are different tests. You get really limited information by your typical wellness panels or yearly panels, through your primary care doctor. And then the normals for regular folk, if you will, or lab normals are not normals for athletes, and surely not ideals.
And that's a big red flag to me when people will bring in their labs from their doctors. And I always did this for myself too. And like the green area where it's good to be in, I want to be up here. I don't want to be the norm. And who is the norm based out of? People that are nearly dead, people that aren't healthy. So the norm, I don't want to be the norm. I want to be above average. So I think getting tests that are more detailed, and like all these people with statin drugs, and why are they on cholesterol medicine, and looking at the results from a doctor might not give them enough information of what we look at the why is something off balance, why do you feel symptoms. Like with this book we use for my nutritional therapy a lot is signs and symptoms. We have them fill out a big huge form, and then what is that related to, if it's like you're not absorbing your nutrients, or if you have, I don't know, diarrhea or small intestine, if your stomach acid's not right. And so there's so much more to it than like the why. And I think the lab testing that your company's doing is going to get a little bit more help us. Let's investigate. Let's put the pieces of the puzzle together. But we need this one part. We need to figure out what's going on, what's low. And then next step, I think, is getting the results back and understanding what you get, and then figure out why. So do you want to dive into my report that I got back?
We sure can.
We can use me as a guinea pig. So I just got my results back, and I've done tons of lab work. I've done genetic testing. Everyone who's followed the show for we've had the show for over 5 years, but the adrenal stuff that I've had, that's what I wrote my book, Life is Not a Race, and then doing more nutritional therapy with people. I actually have not worked on one client yet who is not hyperadrenic or hypoadrenic. So based on our way of living, our chronic busyness, and our maybe people have eaten too many carbohydrates and sugar and processed foods and all that is causing food allergens. But getting the lab work done with that really helps kind of figure out what's going on. But
Debbie,
adrenals.
I'd love to interject with you hit a key point about theorizing, the what's and the whys, and I'll share some statistics with you from our system. The prevalence of particular problems with athletes, for example, deficiencies, iron deficiencies run about 50% across our research, fully in female athletes, which is consistent with outside research as well. We run about 43% in male athletes, which is consistent with outside research as well. Folate is 31%. And we get this question all of the time. Why can't I just supplement everything and avoid it? Or the overtraining or adrenal fatigue, which you alluded to, the incidence is extremely high. And we've been trying to research on why that might exist. And you mentioned the food quality. I think you just mentioned that. Mm-hmm. You've probably seen these studies before, but looking at comparisons at vegetables and fruits from time ago, there was one by give me 1 second, I'll remember. Cushy, the Cushy Institute, Kushi, They looked at vegetables, 12 vegetables from 1975, and compared the nutritional values to 1997, and found that calcium levels were 27% decreased. Iron levels were 30% lower in our newer vegetables. Vitamin A levels were 20% decreased, and vitamin C were 31%, I believe. And that's a good indication of what we're dealing with now. And then and the athletes now, it's look at how they recover. Usually get their long run in the morning and then off to work and work to a swim.
Yeah, I know. And they eat processed foods because you don't have time to sit and have a lunch and sit there for an hour. It's usually eating at your desk, which we talk about in your nervous system. We talk about nutritional therapies that are sitting, focusing, breathing. Mm-hmm. You're in the parasympathetic nervous state when you're eating, instead of I'm working, I'm doing this, I'm reading my book, I'm multitasking and then eating. So I'm in sympathetic mode, which is not going to digest your food. So that's what I'm working on more with people is, all right, let's look at, here's my card, the holistic method, working all those elements that you're sitting, when you're eating, you're focused, and when you're working. But carving, what I talk about in my book, it's off subject, but it's just how we wake up and we just pack all that in, especially if you have kids and you're working full time and you're training for an Ironman. There's not enough hours in the day. So you got to figure out what's going to, you take time away from what to make it work for you. But instead, people just kind of burn the candle at both ends and wear themselves out. So I don't know if your clients that are coming to you saying, oh, I need help, I'm not recovering, I'm not able to perform my best anymore. What can I do with this lab test and get myself better? What pills can I take? I mean, people want results, but this isn't what we're saying is get your lab work and you're going to be fixed. It is some lifestyle changes you have to make, right?
Yeah, I bring that up only because it validates everything that you're doing. So
yeah, thank you. I know it's just an ongoing thing, but it's just, I do this all the time. When I wrote my book, I finally, by writing out my whole life story of why I got to where I was, going, hello, you didn't really change your lifestyle habits. You can take 50 different lab tests and see all these doctors and take all these supplements and nutrients. But if you're still eating incorrectly, you're not digesting your food, you're not going to absorb the nutrients. If you're still not sleeping at night and you're living off caffeine, and I mean, there's so much lifestyle factors that people do. So we're using this information as a tool to help transform the whole you with all those different elements we talk about on the podcast. So on your report, so when you get done, you get an email and it says, kind of introduces you the ABT, the athlete blood test report. Talk about you said your normal range versus ideal range. You talked a little bit about that in your scoring system. Can you touch on that before we dive into what mine said?
Yep. So our first several years of research were, turned into trying to determine what ideal ranges were for athletes. We were primarily using just training volume and gender. Since that time, we've added intensity and age. So we've found these ideal ranges. Basically, the ideal ranges are if you subtract 15% of the low end of that ideal range, you fall into a category where symptoms tend to present. And the symptoms are going to be consistent with whatever the biomarker is. So a lot of times it's fatigue. For most athletic conditions, that is the first symptom. If you go above that point, either it's this unknown, there's no therapeutic benefit, or you risk having levels that can interfere with other biomarkers or important either micronutrients or hormones, etc. A good case for the high would be sex hormone binding globulin. When that's high, that's going to it's going to bind with free testosterone or with testosterone and make it not bioavailable. So that'd be a level that you want lower rather than higher.
Okay. Good. All right. And then, so you get this big report. Mine is 16 pages long, but the scoring system talks about red blood cell status score, micronutrient status score, and training tolerance score. Is that, and then we have the green, yellow, and red. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yep. So the status scores are really they're meant to create some simplicity in understanding. So we all want something that we can just, or a score. Basically, we're competitive people as athletes, and so that's
really?
how we come up with a 5 out of 5 means I'm winning. A 3 out of 5 means I better do something to improve, and you know, a 1 out of 5 means we're not doing well at all. So the score is really meant to draw attention when needed. Okay. Green means normal variance. So athletes, there are a lot of tests, like liver enzymes, for example. I very often hear athletes come in and say that I've been diagnosed with overtraining syndrome because my liver enzymes are high, or my liver is being taxed by my training. And it's actually not true. In most cases, the liver enzymes are elevated because skeletal muscle actually has those same enzymes and can release them when skeletal muscle is broken down. So in cases like that, we have a normal range that goes outside for athletes, that goes outside of what the lab's normal range is, and those will be green. Yellow means an action is needed to optimize performance, but it's not sort of a critical action. It's not likely producing symptoms yet. Red means that particular biomarker is very likely associated with symptoms that you're experiencing.
Okay. So I'll turn the page and look at so the first page is red blood cell analysis. And why is that important for an athlete?
So your red blood cells deliver oxygen to the muscles. And the more optimized oxygen delivery is, the greater endurance you have, the more quickly your muscles can recover from contractions. So, for endurance and for every athlete, it's critical. Mm-hmm. It's the source of, in the past, all the doping scandals, or most of them.
Red blood cells.
So obviously, if you optimize red blood cells, we're going to be better off.
Yes.
And here, there's not so much optimization. It's rather, they tell us a lot about your micronutrient status. And then what we want to see how rapidly they're being produced as well. So we're looking at the size, shape variation, properties of the red blood cells, and we're looking at the number of immature red blood cells to determine if your body is keeping up with the current red blood cell destruction rate.
So sadly, I scored a 4 on this out of a 5. And I want to be a 5, of course, because I'm competitive. So does that get to later why I'm a 4, not a 5?
Yep. So if we scroll down, then you're going to find an explanation about why you're a 4. And you are a 4 because you're at increased risk of soon to be declining red blood cell indices due to low ferritin.
And I've always been low iron. Just I'm not a big animal food eater. I know I need more animal meat, but it always seems my whole life I've always come out low iron. But what is there to do to improve that if you don't want to eat steak?
Yep. So the next best thing is supplementation. Unfortunately, there's just not, for iron, there's not a great way around it. We absorb heme iron or blood source iron much better than non-heme or vegetable sourced iron. And so for those that don't eat meat, if you're training at higher volumes or have some sort of absorption issue that whereby you're more prone to iron being low, then supplementation is very likely to be your answer.
Since I don't want to eat, and I'm not a big fan of cows, so I have to force feed myself meat. White blood cell analysis is the next one. And white blood cells, tell us why we need that tested. Okay.
So white blood cells are sort of a complement to many other tests within this test set. And in white blood cells, we're really looking at immune status, inflammation control, and training tolerance. They in and of themselves are not an indication of poor training tolerance. Rather, if we have other positive findings regarding training tolerance, then we'll look to the white blood cells to determine how far reaching or how deep that problem lies. Yeah. Are the white blood cells being activated because of inflammation?
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying. That's a good marker for inflammation if you have any infections, because mine were in the past high because of trying to protect and fight an infection from, I blame on swimming in Vegas for 70.3 Worlds Half Ironman in 2012, when the water was completely brown. And so I had this blastohominous gut infection that doesn't like to leave, but only time I could know I didn't really have symptoms, but it's just that the white blood cell markers were always off because of that. So I think for triathletes, swimming in open water, we talked about this in another podcast recently about debugging yourself, is swimming in open water in lakes and rivers and stuff. You can pick out a lot of, potential parasites and other toxins and infections from water. So I think this is another reason to get the white blood cell count test. If you have any infections, might be some red flags. Okay, so I didn't get a rating 1 through 5 though. Is that not a rating of your number?
We only rate the what we would consider primary components of the test.
Okay, so that one's for any muscle breakdown inflammation. So next one is a comprehensive metabolic panel. So touch on a little bit what that's the purpose of that panel for us as athletes.
So this too is more of a secondary piece of information. So it becomes important if we're finding abnormalities in other biomarkers. So it really adds to our assessment of training tolerance, muscle recovery, muscle metabolism, and nutrition. But in and of itself, it's fairly limited. Unless there's abnormals, then we cross-reference.
So examples are the glucose, chloride, CO2, total protein, albumin, globulin, lubrium, and alkaline phosphate, alluvium. I'm not saying that right. Globulin ratio. So those are important parts for the metabolic panel. It says training tolerance, muscle recovery, muscle metabolism, nutrition. So I didn't have any red flags on that one, but the next one, as you said, iron analysis, ferritin. So that's the next one is iron analysis. You talked a little bit about that before in red blood cell count, but do you find that's a big area of concern for athletes because we're working out so much?
It is. There's a fairly high incidence of iron deficiencies, but there also is a growing incidence of iron overload, which can be every bit as bad as a deficiency, especially if you're looking at it from a general health perspective. And that comes from just blindly supplementing. We several times a year will find athletes that are blindly supplementing and have a genetic predisposition to high iron absorption, and they're actually potentially, they're putting stress on organs and increasing their risk of some health consequences that we don't really want to talk about much, but
well, I think it's when we take control and start researching online, then you come back. I used to have a bag of supplements. You just waste a lot of money, and you're putting stuff in your body that your body doesn't necessarily need, or you're getting too much of it. So it's nutritional therapy. That's what we Neuralingual test people to find out what supplements your body is lacking based on your lab results and your functional evaluation. But then which ones do you need the most? You don't need everything. You don't even need a multivitamin for some people. Probably you just need specific nutrients that you're lacking. So, but iron, I think, is a good one to get tested if you tend not to eat a lot of red meat and if you exercise a lot. Because I'm a 2 out of a 5 or 2.5.
You scored low on that because your ferritin, which is stored iron, is really low. So I believe in your questionnaire, you indicated that you are supplementing iron. And that seems apparent based on the ratio of serum iron to ferritin. Your serum iron is actually, it's within ideal range. It's excellent. But your body's not pushing iron into storage. And so we need to find a way for you. We need to either increase supplementation, or if you've been on the particular iron supplement that you've been on for a long time and are taking it daily or even about 4 days a week, then we probably should look at a different form of iron for you, because it's not
working.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you have some good tips about taking iron supplement after drinking coffee, because I think that's a good thing to go over with people, is when to take their supplements, that, what the best time of day. And if you need to take iron, if you're taking it with coffee, tea, or soda, that will reduce absorption rate of the iron. So a lot of times, if you wake up, you have water, you have your cup of coffee and take your vitamins, and maybe you don't eat till later. That could be a problem. You can eat. Okay. So hydration status. Now, how do you test hydration? That's through what tests?
So all these tests are your typical kidney enzymes, and they're indicative of kind of workload by the kidneys, and they are at certain levels more indicative of dehydration than a kidney problem. And so there are different degrees of dehydration. In your case, we see just a very slightly high bun creatinine ratio, which is typically associated with very slight or mild dehydration, but it's not high enough to affect the bun or EGFR or creatinine. And so it really is something to us that we would consider a non-issue. The other important reason that we look at hydration status is if you are moderately or significantly dehydrated, then it can give us false results in the red blood cells, and you may look better than you actually are. And same with blood volume. So we need to factor that in our analysis in case there's any skewing of results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I find, I drink water, so this is personal information, share with people, but I don't retain it. And I actually see acupuncture and Chinese medicine, they're about the spleen and your kidneys, and they get stress, and that's related to adrenals as well, and the aldosterone hormone. And so I have to put sea salt in my water. But I find, I'll drink bottled water and I'll go to the bathroom 10 times. So I'm hydrating, but I'm not retaining it. So my tissues aren't absorbing the water. So that's something, if it's, scored like that, if you're drinking water, then, okay, why is your kidney function not good? And that's why I like Chinese medicine. Plus you can relax too at the same time, get acupuncture. But it's interesting kind of combine the Chinese medicine into this information. So micronutrient is the next one, and that tells us about what?
These are outside of iron. We're assessing all of the sort of critical micronutrients that have high prevalence rates for being either high or low in athletes. So the first two on the list are sodium and potassium. The ratio of sodium to potassium is not only important for performance, but also in general health. For example, having a high sodium, lower potassium ratio is associated with an increased risk of even cardiovascular disease. But for the purposes of our tests, we're primarily looking at performance, and those two electrolytes are absolutely critical to performance. yet they're closely tied. Same with magnesium; those three are closely tied. So, for example, if magnesium dips to a certain level, then it tends to pull potassium with it, and some of those sort of epic bunks we've seen in Kona in a hot, humid environment where somebody goes into almost a spastic state, that is often thought of as potentially be doing to or be due to lower magnesium pulling potassium. So we are the magnesium, potassium, sodium. We're really looking at a ratio. Now, calcium affects magnesium, and so we want to test calcium and compare it to magnesium. And then folate. Folate actually has incidence rates of deficiency, especially in females, that are almost comparable to iron. I think I mentioned earlier, it's almost 31% in our research. And folate is much like iron is a critical component of red blood cell production. So low folate can result and often does result in anemia.
Mm-hmm. And then mine were, what?
Can you still see me?
Yeah, I'm low on potassium. Yeah, I see.
Okay.
Potassium and vitamin D is low in me, but it's interesting because I was just because my work schedule, some days, I work mornings and evenings, Tuesdays, Thursdays, but I go biking in the afternoon. So I'm outside getting my vitamin D, but I think it's looking at why are you not absorbing it? What else is off causing that imbalance? And like, why is your potassium low? If that's not getting into the cells or what's going on with that. So you guys have lots of information, a whole page of ways to get more potassium. We're looking at why is it low, and then vitamin D as well, or whatever you show up as low micronutrients. So good information. And then we'll quickly finish up because I know we're going over time, but training tolerance and recovery evaluation, you get a nice chart for this one. So comprehensive assessment of hormones that are essential to optimal performance and recovery. So these are ones we always like to look at, right? Testosterone is in here, cortisol, which is on here. And this was in a fasted state in the morning is when we take the lab test. So how do these information how does this show for cortisol, which fluctuates throughout the day, and the testosterone? Talk a little about those hormones, and the thyroid's really big for everybody too.
Right. So all of these hormones are tied together, as you know, and I'm sure most of your listeners know. And the reason we test them all in a gold panel and silver panel is because we're trying to get a complete picture of your recoverability, which will help you not only determine your ideal training plan, but also race preparation, and training tolerance is a big piece of information that we're trying to gather here. So cortisol it's blood cortisol. There's, as you know, better ways to test cortisol and get a picture of longer duration, being it does fluctuate. But what we're looking for in the cortisol number is really a range. If you're low, and we see findings like we do here of low DHEA, low testosterone, low free testosterone, high SHBG, then that is pretty indicative of an overreaching or overtraining syndrome. And if cortisol is high and you've got the same findings, low testosterone, free testosterone, DHEA, and high SHBG, that also is indicative of a oncoming or very acute overreaching or overtraining syndrome. So if we suspect a sort of a borderline, then sometimes we'll expand on that cortisol and recommend a saliva test, which they're accurate, well accepted, and you can test throughout a day. But the assessment of testosterone and SHBG and DHEA really, for most athletes, we're not looking at overreaching or overtraining diagnosis. We're we're really assessing what their recovery looks like or should look like. Can they tolerate a lot of intensity in their training, say 2 to 3 days of high intensity intervals or weightlifting in addition to their endurance training, or are they better suited just sticking with sort of that heart rate type training, or some other approach? We can predict their likelihood of breakdown and cumulative breakdown throughout the season through this test set.
Wow. So if you are low in the hormones, like I'm low in half of them, but is that showing that you shouldn't do high intensity stuff or long duration when your hormones are low? You should switch to nature walks. Quit while you're ahead.
Not necessarily. Years in sport, what sport you're engaged in. Endurance sports, we're typically going to find low testosterone numbers, borderline low DHEA, and almost always high sex hormone binding globulin. That is a very typical presentation for a long-standing endurance athlete. What matters most is the ratios, and then what cortisol is doing in addition, and what some of the other finding the white blood cells, the metabolic panel, and ALT, AST. So that's earlier I mentioned how those get pulled into our overall assessment of training tolerance, and that's how they get pulled in.
Okay. So it's great feedback so people can learn more, and you go over this with them in their appointment and people can read more. And then we'll run through the last two is this lipid panel, which I always talking to clients to get the full breakdown because most doctors don't do the detailed of the breakdown, the VLDL, very low lipid density. But most people just get the total cholesterol. This one gives you a little more breakdown in cholesterol for the lipid panel. And then the last one is just kind of a summary of what is your blood test telling you. So you kind of take all that information, summarize it. Here's what you need to do. And you have a personal comment. So you type in all these onto everyone's reports. You have to write in. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, we
believe have to have more model. Of you soon. So, says first, in your high risk toward overreaching and overtraining syndrome. And I haven't even been over. See, this is a funny thing. That's why, I talk a lot on the podcast why we need to take care of ourselves and do this testing, because I haven't been able to race since 2012, and I've tried 2013 and 14. I tried, and I just can't get my health back. And I think, if you have some setbacks, you're wondering why you're not feeling your best and performing best, I always try to stress that you need to do this before it gets to be where I've gotten to be, that 5 years and I still can't do a marathon or an Ironman or even half Ironman and get my pace where I was. And if everyone tells me that's age related, I will kick their behind. But I hate saying it's age related because I don't believe it is, because I know all these people keep getting faster in their 50s. But I think getting this information while you're training, so you have those alertness to the red flags before it's too late that you're screwed up for years and having to really dig yourself out of the hole. So is that kind of what you're finding, that, the purpose of athlete blood tests to get this information while you're training so you can stay healthy and perform your best and be able to, like you said before, do it for another 10, 20 years and make it a healthy sport, not something that's breaking you down from the inside out?
Yeah, that's really a good summary of why it's important. Number one, it's important because of the prevalence of problems. If your risk is 50% that you're going to run into a problem that will not only decrease your performance, but your enjoyment of the sport, those odds are pretty high, too high for me to gamble with. But number two, it's so critical that we learn our unique physiology, because that's how we're going to get the most out of ourselves, not only in our sport, but our lives. And that's really what a test like this does, is it identifies what's unique to you. How well do you absorb certain micronutrients. What does your training plan need to look like? And as we work with pro teams, it's interesting. Pro teams used to really have one training plan for everybody, and they've learned through services like ours and genetic testing that which we provide as well, that it's not a one size fits all. Mm-hmm. And identifying what makes you unique is going to result in the best experience for you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the whole point of how to perform your best is you got to do more than just looking at your training schedule. Test your heart rate variability, get your lab testing done throughout the year, and get, what you guys talk about, the gold, silver, bronze. And I would start with the platinum genetic testing, because I did that test as well with another program, and it really gives you some information to help you out. So I would start with that and then retest, and don't just get it and never retest again. I think you need to figure out how to get yourself better. And as you said, different times of the year based on your race schedule, or maybe you're not even racing like me, you're just trying to be healthier and want to slow the aging process down is what I'm focusing on. I'm not feeling like an old person, but feel young and vibrant, energetic. I don't want to have these things being low and having these red flags. So I think I encourage people to get these tests done and really take care of themselves, because we're putting ourselves through the ringer the way we live life, and put that triathlon training or whatever sport you're doing on top of that is a lot of work. And people just keep trying to do it. We want to do it because we love it, but we got to, pay the price. So anything else you'd like to share? The website is athletebloodtest.com, right? Did I say that right?
Right, yeah.
And they can use the whole athlete, just the whole athlete, one word, to get in and be, we can help you out and get you set up and get the lab work, and they can choose which one to get. And then it's quick turnaround. Like I said, it took me 4 or 5 days to get my results back, and you get the email and a consultation with your feedback and over the results, and see your training tolerance score. Hopefully get better than a 3.5. All right. Well, thanks for your time, Garret, and we'll post any other articles, stuff that we mentioned in the show notes, thewholeathletepodcast.com, and they can put information, questions on the Facebook page, The Whole Athlete, as well. Great. Thanks for coming out today on our new YouTube channel, as well as audio version on iTunes. So you are listening to this on iTunes, you can actually go see us on YouTube, The Whole Athlete Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Whole Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at wholeathletepodcast.com. You can help us continue and grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and see you next time.